It is difficult to be a teenager under any circumstances, but it must have been especially difficult for a precocious Catholic boy to spend his adolescence in war-torn Belgium, haunted by the memory of his mother's suicide by drowning. During such a chaotic time, the visceral sound of battlefield, the poignant poems of soldiers in the trenches, and the grim photographs of wounded bodies could compel anyone to redefine the traditional notion of bravery. For me, the unexpected concept of liberation developed by the iconic surrealist René Magritte have illuminated my path, providing a framework to contemplate these complex themes across a range of topics.
Is there anyone in the entire world who was as complex, controversial as this gentleman? He was both a master of fake art as well as the inventor of a new language which we have never ever seen in the world of surrealism.
Magritte and many artists of his generation were strongly motivated to renegotiate the role of visual art at a time when compact cameras were becoming increasingly affordable for the general public. As more avant-garde artists were influenced by Martin Heidegger's ideas, especially the notion that individuals in the same space each have a unique, subjective experience. They were encouraged to create pictorial representations that captured personal reflections and associations, regardless of traditional common sense hierarchical structure and norms. Do we truly know someone simply by recognizing the structure of their face, the sound of their voice, the scent of their skin, or where they live? Or is there a hidden clue that reveals what truly captures their attention?
René Magritte and his beloved wife Georgia lived in this house in almost 20 years and almost at the end of his life. And I find this painting particularly moving when looking at it today.
I think Magritte proved that although we often repeat the ancient proverb that a picture is worth 1,000 words, we cannot reach a reliable conclusion about what somebody is trying to convey without a descriptive narrative or context. What do we see in that painting? Is it two people dreaming in a room with a black paper or a luminous bulb ahead? Or is it two people playing a small white ball in a dark room? Or perhaps two people doing exercise in the middle of the night under the gloomy moonlight? Another example is the staircase leaning against the wall. Without telltale details, it is impossible to determine its function. I wonder if Magritte already understood the difference between quick deduction and slow contemplation decades before Daniel Kahneman began discussing the risks of hasty conclusions.
Look at what we find here, his iconic smoking pipe. It has decorated so many different paintings, which you have seen in the textbook before. Wow.
During the interwar period, the rise of photomontage provided avant-garde artists with powerful new tools to challenge the status quo. Beyond merely showcasing an object's function or the artist's craftsmanship, these works often manipulated scale to subvert traditional values. For example, by placing an elegant smoking pipe in the foreground and a human figure in the background, the artist shifts the focus. The object itself becomes the primary subject, highlighting the guilty pleasures that were once seen as a mark of gentleman's sophistication.
This is indeed a masterwork, a combination of an old man in the autumn of life together with the iconic La Primera, a celebration of spring, the contrast per se gives you an incentive to question, not question about life, but question about the order of life.
The fixation on youth, combined with the weight of the decisions one must make at a young age, when life experience is still very limited, presents a challenge for all of us. Although we can sometimes reverse our choices later in life, such as the partners we select, the professions we pursue, or the lifestyle we opt for, doing so often came at a high price, especially after and during a personal crisis. While the beauty of youth is apparent, I believe it is easier to live later in life.
I have never ever seen the tree of life in this guise. I mean, this is just ingenious. What do you have instead of the petals? You have a whole forest just in the middle of the flower. It kind of a depiction of nature in which every detail actually bears the genetic codes of a much bigger ecosystem. Without that ecosystem, none of the small creature could survive, could prosper, could generate the next generation of the same creature.
In a time of rapid change, the need to connect with people and ideas while self-reliantly detaching from old-fashioned, outdated wisdom must have been a daunting task for those living in the interwar period. While the development of airplanes brought the world closer together, the sound of aerial bombing gave the concept of war's ferocity an entirely new dimension. The very intellectual nourishment that lifted people out of backwardness, such as the mastery of electricity or discovery of radio waves, simultaneously empowered warlords to win the battles with a greater depth.
It is another marvelous work of art which he made. It says the tree of knowledge. Nevertheless, in the original French title, they use the word science. Science is a fact. It's not just imagination or reflection. What is fact? Is fact something which we just comprehend, or is fact something which we actually could prove? We could prove it. It's smoke, but at the same time, could we really reproduce it?
The development of psychoanalysis as a new scientific discipline must have challenged the conventional definition of science from its very foundation. As newspapers reached the audience in both urban and rural areas, new forms of analysis and narrative descriptions began to proliferate. This led people to question whether it was truly possible to reproduce someone's thought or quantify the quality of research using traditional deductive methods. Furthermore, could the importance of psychological research be ignored at a time when automobiles and modern media were already accelerating the speed of information transmission? Ultimately, defining one's identity became a daunting task, as nationalistic ideals continue to shape how Europeans understood themselves.
I have so much to do in my life. On one hand, I need to work. On the other hand, I need to look happy. This is a very nice of life. And Edvard Munch in Norway produced this famous iconic scene. And this is the contribution of René Magritte. The very nice. The sky is colored by blood, and we're sitting around the table. Which role you're going to play, it's not always that easy to understand.
Magritte was only 14 years old when World War I broke out. Although he never served as a soldier, the economic hardships, and the general sense of exhaustion in Belgium, where many blood battles took place, subtly influenced his work. The psychological experiences preceding death, in its various guises, were explicitly explored in many of his paintings. His most terrifying depictions often portray highly dangerous environments that offer no chance of survival.
I think this is probably the most bleak depiction of reality. A fish has to leave the water in order to understand the real vista which surround around the water. However, when he leaps out and leave the water, he could really not go back because his living condition is water, and the obvious consequence is that he has to die. And could he actually transmit his knowledge to his friends? No, he could not, because all his friends remain in the water. I think this is sometimes what we all have to encounter in our life. That is, could we really convey what we know to others? Especially if it requires some terrible journey to collect the truth which we have learned through life.
Magritte did not create beautiful pictures to glorify the greatness of life. Instead, by exaggerating the nonsensical themes of everyday mundanity, his artworks leave a memorable impression of his desperate need to remind us of the importance of reaching self-reliant conclusions based on our unique experiences. Ultimately, no one else has the energy to evaluate another person's contributions when they're taking their last breath.